You're listening to Talking Diplomacy. This is a podcast about diplomacy and international relations brought to you by the Lithuanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. August 23rd. It is an ordinary day for many people worldwide, but not to the countries that were heavily affected by the secret protocols of Molotov-Ribbentrop pact. Discussing this Nazi-Soviet pact in one of his articles, Edward Lucas, analyst and security expert, call it the most horrific episode in the history of diplomacy of the 20th century. So what was this pact, and how come, paradoxically as it sounds, the non-aggression pact paved a way for World War II? In this episode, we will delve deeper into the mystery surrounding the pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union.
All of those other non-aggression pacts are exactly what they say they are. They are non-aggression pacts where the two sides promise not to go to war with one another, promise to settle their differences by negotiation. And at first sight, the Nazi-Soviet pact is the same as that. The text of the pact itself is a standard non-aggression pact.
Roger Moorhouse is a historian specializing in modern German and Central Europe history and a visiting professor at the College of Europe in Warsaw. In this episode, he is sharing the insights on the impact and consequences of the Soviet-Nazi pact. This interview was recorded as a part of a longer talk on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the Molotov-Ribbentrop pact. Let's start with the essential facts. What was the Molotov-Ribbentrop pact? Why was it different from the other pacts and treaties? For example, the Munich Agreement of 1938.
The Nazi-Soviet pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop pact of 1939, is an essential part of the development of diplomatic relations in the run-up to World War II. It's an essential green light given by Stalin to Hitler, to his war plans. It's signed on the 23rd of August 1939 in Moscow between the German Foreign Minister Ribbentrop and the Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov. And at first sight, it's essentially just another non-aggression pact. There are a lot of non-aggression pacts being signed in the 1930s. It's quite a common diplomatic instrument between nations. All of those other non-aggression pacts are exactly what they say they are. They are non-aggression pacts where the two sides promise not to go to war with one another, promise to settle their differences by negotiation. And at first sight, the Nazi-Soviet pact is the same as that. The text of the pact itself is a standard non-aggression pact. What sets the Nazi-Soviet pact apart is the secret protocol that was appended to it, which was signed at the same time, which essentially divided Central Europe into spheres of influence between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. And this is what sets it apart from other political and diplomatic treaties of the period. The comparison that's often made, particularly in the Soviet and then later the Russian narrative and the Russian historiography, is to compare the Nazi-Soviet pact with the Munich Agreement of September 1938. And the Munich Agreement was the instrument by which the British and the French essentially dismembered Czechoslovakia to meet German territorial demands. The demand from Hitler that the Sudetenland, the German-inhabited area of Bohemia and Moravia, should be ceded to Germany. The British and the French essentially forced the Munich Agreement on the Czechs and dismembered Czechoslovakia to meet Hitler's requirements. And in the aftermath, in the breakup of the Czechoslovakia, the Poles took a small area of a place called Teschen. Now, the comparison is often made, particularly by the Russians, that that was in every way comparable to the Nazi-Soviet pact, but that's really rather disingenuous. The Munich Agreement, however, in retrospect, wrong-headed it was an attempt to secure peace. The Nazi-Soviet pact and its secret protocol was a treaty for war. They are fundamentally different. So the Molotov-Ribbentrop pact, or the Nazi-Soviet pact, was a non-aggression pact signed between Nazi Germany, Hitler's Germany, and the Soviet Union, signed on the 23rd of August 1939. And it contained within it a secret protocol. Crucially, this is what marks out the Nazi-Soviet pact, contained within it a secret protocol which divided up Central Europe into spheres of influence between Nazi Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union. So this paved the way for World War II and essentially for the division of Central Europe.
The signing of a pact was announced and documented. There are even photographs from that time. But the public didn't know about the secret protocols. Or did it?
There are whispers at the time, just after the signature of the Nazi-Soviet pact, that there was a secret protocol attached to it, and very broad suggestions of what information those protocols might contain. But it wasn't really made public until after the war. The protocols were raised at the Nuremberg trials in 1945-46, but the Soviets were very keen to prevent the Nazi-Soviet pact being an issue, being brought up at the Nuremberg trials, and they effectively prevented that from happening. So they prevented any discussion of the wider implications of the pact. So it took really until 1948 for the protocols, first of all, to be published. And that happened in a tranche of documents which had been found by the Americans, post-war German documents which was found by the Americans, and were subsequently published in 1948 by the State Department. And that was the first time that the text of the secret protocol was made public. And the Soviet reaction was very interesting. The Soviets essentially claimed that these were falsifications, that these were forgeries. The Soviet policy was not to deny the Nazi-Soviet pact because that had been made public, but particularly to deny the secret protocols. So they denied the existence of the secret protocols right up until 1989. Interestingly, Vyacheslav Molotov, who had signed the pact and signed the secret protocol, denied the existence of the secret protocols right up to his death in 1986. So that was official Soviet policy until 1989, was to deny the existence of the secret protocols.
It is only 1992 when the secret protocols were declassified. It was the order of Boris Yeltsin, the first president of Russia. Since then, academics and society tried to understand the full impact that the signing of the protocols brought. What were the actual consequences of the protocols for Europe?
We have to understand that it is down to the secret protocols that Central Europe is divided between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union in 1939. That division ends effectively in 1941 with the German invasion of the Soviet Union, but then the Soviet gains from the secret protocol to the Nazi-Soviet pact are then restored unilaterally by Stalin in 1944-1945. So all of those gains that he took in concert with Hitler in 1939, he reclaims when the Red Army sweeps westward in 1944-45. The Baltic States are particularly grievously affected by the secret protocol, by the Nazi-Soviet pact, because of course that was the instrument by which the Baltic States were incorporated into the Soviet Union in 1939-1940. And that became then the same, if you like, legal instrument by which they were reincorporated in 1944-45. So the secret protocol particularly, but the Nazi-Soviet pact more generally, became the basis upon which the national life of the three Baltic states was effectively destroyed, was effectively disrupted by that incorporation into the Soviet Union. So that became effectively the legal basis for the incorporation into the Soviet Union, which was something that the Baltic states tried very hard to resist, but ultimately unsuccessfully until the end of the Soviet period. The three Baltic states had made important progress, both socially, economically and politically in the interwar period. And that progress was effectively derailed by the occupation and annexation of the Baltic states in 1940. And from then on, until the end of the Soviet period in 1991, the Baltic states are effectively on a different trajectory politically and economically. That means they are part of the Soviet Union. They exist in a non-democratic political system, effectively a dictatorship. They are part of a political and social and economic experiment that the Soviet Union was. So it was really taken down a very different path, and one which was not terribly welcome or attractive to the majority of the population themselves. And of course it included all of those oppressive elements of Soviet rule, deportation, the secret police, the very tight restriction of any sort of discussion in the public sphere, that sort of thing. So it's a very difficult environment in which to exist. So that, and all of that, of course, the incorporation into the Soviet Union, the annexation, the occupation, all stemmed from the Nazi-Soviet pact.
It has been more than 80 years since the Nazi-Soviet pact was signed. Is it legitimate to say that its impact is felt particularly in the Baltic states to this day?
The secret protocol is still felt, definitely, in the Baltic states. It's one of those aspects that I think because it was so profound during the Soviet period, particularly, almost as the ultimate sort of betrayal, the ultimate boo word in Baltic society at that time, that will take a long time to dissipate. And I think particularly the geopolitical position that the Baltic states find themselves in now, which is that they are small countries with a large country as their eastern neighbour, a large country that is traditionally quite expansionist and can be quite aggressive, and still harbours ambitions to perhaps reincorporate what it calls its near abroad. It shows that the problems that created the secret protocol and that the secret protocol embodied, those problems have not yet completely gone away. So the secret protocol has not yet been consigned to history, unfortunately. So those pressures and those threats are unfortunately still there.
Exactly 50 years after the pact, something extraordinary happened. People from Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia gathered together to stand in the longest live human chain. It is now known as the Baltic Way. What is so fascinating about this campaign?
The Baltic Way is, I think, particularly interesting because it is, first of all, a mass protest. There's upwards of 2 million people participated in the Baltic Way protest. It was effectively a human chain that spanned the three Baltic republics, spanned something like 700 kilometers in length. So meticulous in its organization, first of all, to actually coordinate that large number of people. Also, it was transnational, which is crucial, so across the three republics of the Baltic states, which is tremendously impressive from a logistical point of view. Also politically, it's very significant. The Soviet Union was inching towards reform at this point in 1989. So you have Gorbachev in power as the General Secretary of the Communist Party, and with his glasnost and perestroika, he is attempting to reform the structures and the political outlook of the Soviet Union. Ultimately fails in that process, but he is at least trying to reform. So it's important to understand that the Baltic Way is both part of that process and a reaction to it. It is an attempt to take advantage of the new comparative liberalism of the Soviet state at that point. So it's interesting, for example, that there's not really much of an official crackdown in the aftermath of the Baltic Way, which is quite an interesting aspect. So there is a propaganda counter-narrative given by the Soviet press and others, but there's not much in the way of a clampdown, and that I think is quite important to recognise.
What are the lessons from the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact case today?
It's important to remember that there were two totalitarian villains in World War II, not one. And this period of the Nazi-Soviet Pact, or the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, is one that shows us those two villains very clearly in operation and crucially in collaboration with one another. And it's an area that has traditionally been airbrushed, has been forgotten from the Western narrative. For a modern world, looking at that, the story of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, I think it's a lesson in maintaining international alliances, maintaining international contacts, and crucially, I think, for those nations like the Baltic states who perhaps feel occasionally nervous with larger, perhaps more aggressive neighbours to one side or other, that they do need to have foreign contacts. You can't survive alone in the modern world, and to remind the Western world that it sometimes needs to go into bat. It needs to help out, have a commitment to the smaller nations within its political sphere. So it's a reminder of all of those, of the frailties really of the world that we live in, that there are still perils there that need to be met and need to be guarded against.
Today, August 23rd is known in many countries as a Black Ribbon Day, on which we commemorate the victims of Nazi and Stalin regimes. Europe still remembers the tragic events, but tremendous international efforts are also put to create and maintain the political structure that would discourage war and encourage cooperation and peaceful coexistence not only in Europe but worldwide. Thank you for listening. We hope that this episode at least partly filled the knowledge gap or sparked your curiosity to learn more about the less discussed events of history. Stay tuned for future episodes, and you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Flickr. Thank you.